My name is Bessida Cauthorne White, and I welcome you on behalf of the Middlesex County Museum and Historical Society. We are delighted that you have decided to spend your afternoon with us. Um, we're going to be talking this afternoon about family treasures. It's one of my favorite topics. I talk about it all the time, among other things. But some things we do want to share with you. One of the things that we will let you know is the Middlesex Museum is in the process of mounting an exhibition on African American businesses in Middlesex County. And so you will see the connection as we talk between the family treasures and those stories told as we talk about African American businesses. And for those of you who may have information about African American businesses in your personal stashes, then we ask that you consider sharing those with us. So we're going to move along. So what on earth are family treasures? They are things that are highly valued or prized based on memories, connections to people of the past, connections to places and things of the past. Sometimes family treasures may have been passed down from generation to generation to generation over many, many years. Sometimes they're newly acquired. Sometimes it's what someone created last year. Family treasures have special meaning, tell us stories about our family. They enrich the sense of family and community. And you say, well, are they valuable? Well, to whom? Family treasures may be of monetary value, but most likely not. They are of value to you because they're about your family and your community. So, what is the point? What do they do for us? They provide comfort. They help us to tell family and community stories and shed light on the tales and lives of our ancestors. I always say that family treasures help to put some of the bones on the skeleton that's family history. In other words, we've got these raw dates, born such and such a date, married such and such a date, died. That's the skeleton. But what's the flesh on the bones? And the family treasures and the stories about them do much to put flesh on those bones. And of course, the other thing is that as we look at our own families and we look at our own communities, we can see how what's going on in our families and our communities has an effect on the larger national narrative even. So we see that. We learn so much about our ancestors by what they leave behind. And one of the things that I like is that whenever I've been doing family history probably for 40 years or more. I used to say 40, it's probably 50. But when I come around, sometimes folks, the eyes glaze over. You start to talk about all that family history, and sometimes folks are not so interested in what you have to say. But when you start to populate that story with all of the visuals and all of the treasures, then all of a sudden you get the interest of folk that you may not have had before. And that's particularly young folk as we try to involve our young people in family history. So what are family treasures? I mean, almost anything. Jewelry, furniture and housewares, clothing and textiles, books and documents, photographs, tools, musical instruments, artwork and crafts, medals and awards, ephemera. What do I mean by ephemera? Those things that are created, not meant to last, whether it's the theater ticket, or maybe it's today's newspaper, or maybe it is the program from an event. Absolutely anything that one values is a family treasure. And I'll tell you how I got to be intentional about family treasures. I think I've always had a sense that I should hold on to them, but I was really not intentional about it until fairly recently. And I'm always, I copy off of other people. I copy what they're doing all the time. So I was attending a virtual workshop the Baptist General Convention of Virginia has this program called Sacred Spaces, where they are preserving African American churches, cemeteries, schools, that kind of thing. And the assistant director of that program, Dr. Stephanie Wilkes, about 2 years ago, started to talk about family treasures. And it just resonated with me because they figured out that you can't do family history without doing church history. You can't do church history without family history, community history. It's all interwoven. And so when Dr. Wilkes started to talk about family treasures, I thought, wow. So that was like October of 2021. The very next, well, 2 months later, in December, for our genealogy society, and I always am wearing different hats. So with this Middle Peninsula African American Genealogical and Historical Society, so we decided to ask folk to send in photographs of some of their treasures, and we would share them at that meeting. So that was kind of my first step. But then it was Christmas time, and it was a COVID Christmas. And so what do you do when you've had a family dinner that you had in person every year since the mid-50s, and then it's the second COVID Christmas. So the first COVID Christmas, we exchanged recipes, and we made we'd done a family cookbook years before, but we did a COVID recipe book, and we exchanged photographs and showed them on Zoom of Christmases past. So you can't do that again, so I thought we will share family treasures. So I asked my cousins to send me photographs and a description, and I gave them examples, much like the list I just shared with you. So some people sent things in. Others said they did not have anything. Well, I don't have anything like that. So when we had this virtual white family Christmas dinner, we shared, and oh, wow, people were just mesmerized by the stories that were told. And we were often running in terms of family treasures. And of course, what folks were saying, well, I could have shared my grandmother's dish. I could have shared Uncle Grady's hat. Well, you didn't, but next time you will. And so that's how I got involved in this. So then I thought, well, that very first, one of the first times I was talking to my husband about it, he said, well, I'm going on to this. This is, he came to me, and I'm working on family treasures, and he said, well, what about this? Is this something you'd like to include? And then he told me that this pocket watch that you see was a pocket watch that his aunt had given him about 15 years before, telling him that it belonged to her grandfather, who would be my husband's great-grandfather. And so it's an amazing watch, and so we started to look at the stories behind it. And one of the things, sometimes you really can't document whether something is what it's supposed to be or of the era. But fortunately, of course, you know you can't believe everything you find on the internet. There are things that are well-sourced and some that are not. But this watch is supposed to belong to Major Timothy McNeil, who was born in South Carolina in 1864 and a part of the Great Migration to the Northeast and died in Philadelphia in 1912. So the first thing we did was to look to see whether the watch was even the right era. Because, you know, so often you've got something and you're told, well, this is supposed to belong to Great-Grandma Sue, and she died in 1925, and this item was made in 1940, so not quite. And so what we found is a fairly good source of information about Elgin watches, and this watch was made about 1888. And so we may never know, and of course there's one person left who can tell us a little about this. She's 103 years old. The aunt that gave my husband the watch is no longer living, but we've got that one aunt who can tell the story a little bit. So we may never know, but it's a fascinating piece. As you can see there, it opens on both sides. There's the watch face on one side, but then on the other side, it's actually a locket. Excuse me. Anyway, what we have concluded is that this piece is probably the oldest thing that we as a household collectively own. So go on to, this is probably our second oldest And I'll tell you about how we use these items to tell the stories. So this is the Postal Commission for one of my great-grandfathers, Robert Henry Cauthorne. Was born about 1857, died in 1948. And he became the postmaster at Dunsville in Essex County in 1897. And this is the actual Postal Commission. And I'm so fortunate that my great aunt gave this to me. She had many, many nieces and nephews she could have given it to. She had many, many great nieces and nephews, but she gave it to me. And so I like to say that I'm the custodian of this for this moment. And so it's my responsibility to hold on to it and to see that it's preserved for posterity, which I ended up doing to the tune of several $100s to have a conservator work on it. It was actually in the frame that we think it may have been in for many, many years, and so I didn't take it. I knew better than to take it out myself. I had a conservator work on it. They washed it. They did whatever they do, and while it was out, I was able to get a good scan of it, and so that the Essex County Museum has what you see displayed along with the narrative on my great-grandfather. And of course, that is his photograph. And just as we're telling the community story, someone said, oh, well, he was probably one of the first black folks to be postmaster at Essex County. Not quite. His cousin, whose name was Carter Peterson, was actually the postmaster at Montague in southern Essex, even as I think about 1868 or 1869. So we learned to tell the whole story from the pieces that we have. And when folks know that you will preserve things, they bring you things and they give you things. And so I don't know if she's here today, but this came to me from Davelin Talaferro, who just came to me at one of our genealogy meetings, it was pre-pandemic, and said, I have something for you. I know that your relative graduated from Wayland Seminary, and I have the graduation invitation, Wayland Seminary, 1897. So Wayland Seminary was located in Washington, D.C. as one of the three schools that came together later to make up Virginia Union University. But this is the actual invitation. I had seen a bad photocopy of it, and this is actually, it's hard to see up there, but this is actually readable. Of course, I have it in an acid-free box. I try to keep it climate controlled and that kind of thing. But this is transcription. So this is my great-grandfather's brother, and his name was William Andrew White, and he was the president of the class in the Wayland 1897 class, and he was this was normal school, so I'm not getting a bachelor's degree yet. And he was also in the theological department. And so then I was able to, because this is now Virginia Union University, I was talking to the archivist at Virginia Union, and she said, I think I've got a picture of that class. And so we actually have a picture of his class, and he's in the center there. Let's see if I can make this pointer work. He's right there in the center, kind of turned to the side, but he is president of the class, and so I was able to put together these things from different sources to tell his story. And we talk about him. This man went to Canada, and folks say, oh, did he go during the Revolution? I mean, well, when I say I have a relative who went to Canada, the first thing is, did he go during the Revolutionary War? Was it the War of 1812? Did he go on the Underground Railroad? Well, none of that. This person was he was kind of an outlier. He was going to Canada on his own. And what happened was at Wayland Seminary, he was taught by a white woman from Nova Scotia who convinced him that things were far better for Negroes in Canada. And he did want to get a baccalaureate degree. And so he had no money, though. I mean, he had exhausted all he had to get from King and Queen to Wayland and graduate. And so she said things are so much better for Negroes there. If you go to Canada, I will help you get into my alma mater, which is Acadia University, and help you to find some money to do that. So he took her up on it, and he stayed in Canada, had 13 children, lots of relatives up there. was one of the only black officers in the Canadian Army worldwide during World War I. And so it made quite a mark on Canada, but that's how we tell his story and we illustrate the story. And so then, being a researcher is something that's best not done alone. It's a cooperative kind of thing. And so I got a call one day from Gloria Waller, who many of you may know, and she said, I just found your relative's picture at Temple University. And I said, really? So in the Charles Blockson collection, and Blockson was a historian of note, in the William Still papers, the family papers, she found William Andrew White's picture. And this is the graduation picture from Acadia University in 1903. And so we say, well, why is it in the Still papers? Well, everything is so connected. Now, when we say Still, not William Grant Still, not the composer, but the other William Still, who was the abolitionist and black man in the Philadelphia area, well, it turned out that Gloria Waller, right from, if many of you who are local know the Wallers right across the river in Gloucester, so that a Waller man leaves Gloucester, Middlesex, migrates to Philadelphia as a part of the Great Migration, and marries William Still's granddaughter. So that is why these families, and of course the connection is that I didn't explain, is my great-great-grandmother married Gloria Waller's great-grandfather after their spouses died, so the Waller-White connection. But anyway, that's complicated. But so we find these things and we put them together and we share as researchers to tell those stories. But that's a picture that we in the family had not had prior to Gloria's finding this at Temple. And actually, I'm in the process now. I've connected with a researcher in the Still family, and I'm waiting to hear what she has that might shed light further on those family relationships. So this is my great-grandfather, whose brother was the brother to William Andrew White, and he hardly ever left King and Queen. Maybe he left to go and visit someone who had migrated to Baltimore, and maybe he went as far as Philadelphia, maybe, but he basically spent his life at King and Queen Courthouse. And so that's his photograph. And to the right, you see a bed that he owned. And to give you some proportion, the head of that bed is taller than I am, and I'm, almost 6 feet tall. And so we had that belonged to George Granville White. And when I put out that call to my relatives to send me photographs, then a young cousin sent me a photograph of that chair, and she said it was made by George Granville White. And I thought, what? That's a piece I had never heard. And so one of the things we find out is when someone is raised by grandparents, raised by somebody 2 generations away or more, then you know a lot that you wouldn't know if you were raised by parents. And so this particular cousin was raised by her grandparents, my father's older brother, and so she owns that chair. And I think about, well, he was very skillful. And of course, we knew that. We know that he made shoes. He made caskets. I mean, he made a lot of different things, but he actually made that chair, and we look at what must he have done to wet those pieces of wood to make them to curve like they are. But anyway, as we tell George Granville White's story, and just a little piece of his story as well, when we were doing the research to put up the lynching marker, the marker for the lynching victim in King and Queen County it's put up last year, we found out that he was one of 3 black men on the coroner's jury for that lynching case, as we try to tell his story. So this is another part of my family, and we tell a different story. Some years ago, I was on the board of the Black History Museum in Richmond, and we had a traveling exhibition on African American migration. And what we wanted to do was to put a local component to that traveling exhibition. So my family, on some level, is guilty of keeping most everything. So I found the documents you see there, and the top document is a receipt for $25 signed by Mr. Eastman, who was the clerk of the Circuit Court of Middlesex County. This is in the 1920s. And that letterhead from the clerk's office there, actually, when you had a deed of trust and borrowed money on property, we would think of paying the bank. Well, for some reason, the practice then was payments were made to the circuit court where the deed of trust was held. And so basically, this is my maternal grandmother's brother, Joseph Henry Smith from King and Queen, bought this property in Middlesex in the early 1920s. And then he did what so many folk did. He went north to work at what we used to say in the vernacular, in private family. So he was working as a domestic to pay for his property. And this was on Philadelphia's main line, out Ardmore, Bryn Mawr, Wayne, somewhere like that. And I've got all the receipts from my grandmother, kept them amazingly enough. And I found them, didn't even know they were in the house, found them maybe about 20 years ago. And he paid for the property. Now, working as a domestic, sending small amounts of money, he paid that deed of trust, paid it off early. And so what a success story. But then what happened was, and as I researched him, I didn't know this, to tell his story in the exhibition, I found out that he died here in Middlesex County in 1937 of tuberculosis. And what apparently happened was, having paid off the property, he then comes home, he's got to borrow money to eat, I guess, and he's ill, he dies, and the property is foreclosed upon. Now, I've not figured out why it took them 4 or 5 years to foreclose upon the property. I suspect it may have been because the trustee was a family member, but that is a sad story, but Joseph Henry Smith's story, and it's a story of triumph and of tragedy, so we like to tell all of the stories. And this is my grandmother, the sister of Joseph Henry Smith, Ida Smith Cauthorne, born in 1884, died in 1965. And so I found, again, in my parents' home, I found this gold piece that you see there. And it says on the one side, let's see if I can point to, I don't know if I can, you can see that for some reason. But anyway, to the left, it says Ida S. Cauthorne. And to the right, it says WBDMC, 1916 to 1942. So fortunately, I knew what this was. I could have spent a long time trying to figure out what that was, but I knew it was the Woman's Baptist District Missionary Convention, which is an affiliate of the Southside Rappahannock Baptist Association, which of course is the Black Baptist in this area. And I had known that my grandmother was an officer, I mean, before my time, but I knew she was very involved in the Women's Convention. And so at this point, I did not know, what she did. I mean, she did something from 1916 to 1942. And so I started to look at the minutes, which some of them do exist. I started in 1942, didn't see anything, and fortunately didn't have to go too far, because in 1943, I found, these are the minutes, and basically what it says is that she was the treasurer of the Women's Convention for all those years, and she had stepped down, and it describes in that narrative there, it describes the fact that she, as a former treasurer, was getting what they call a locket. It's not really a locket, it's a medallion, but that she was getting that, and the president as well. And I just have to I've been doing so much research from so many different projects. So one of the things that we're working on, I'll just take a little diversion to tell you this, is Antioch Baptist Church, and Reverend Holmes is present, sir. I've gotten approved a highway marker for Antioch Baptist Church. And one of the things that we're looking at is trying to find information on the founding members, the early folk, and their descendants so they can be invited. The other piece we're trying to find, another project I'm working on, is we have a marker approved for Essex County for something called the Old Folks Home. which was a senior resident operated by that same women's convention. And we're looking at the 7 women who were trustees on that deed in 1904. Now, women had a hard time being on the deeds of their own homes, much less somewhere else. And so these women were really ahead of their time. But anyway, the point is that this other person on this, who was the president, who got an award when my grandmother did, it turned out that all these projects were connected because that person is the granddaughter of the founding pastor of Antioch Baptist Church and the daughter of the person who was the mover and shaker, the president of the Women's Convention when the Old Folks Home came about. And so it's all interconnected. So I just wanted to stop to say that. And that's the joy about researching this area. It truly is all interconnected. My grandmother, again, this is her. Like I said, they kept everything. This is her contract from King William County Public Schools, 1937-38. And of course, she was a teacher. But the part I wanted to really note, and I wrote it here because my vision is such that I can't read that up there, but it says $47.50 per month for a term of 8 months. Teachers shall be held responsible for the sanitary condition of all school buildings and grounds at all times during school term. So basically, she was the janitor, in addition to being the teacher in a one-room school. And so it's just amazing as we look back. And of course, my grandmother had graduated from Virginia State, I guess it was Normal and Industrial Institute at that time in 1905, because it had at a point been called collegiate, but they figured Negroes didn't need collegiate, so they'd gotten rid of that name by that time. But I do have that contract. Now, this is my grandfather, maternal grandfather, the husband to Ida Smith Cauthorne, James Webb Cauthorne, born in 1885 and died in 1955. All my life, I heard that Daddy Jimmy, as we called him, was given this punch bowl. He went to Baltimore. Now, he lived at Ozena. You know, that's one of those post offices that doesn't exist anymore, between Dunsville and Center Cross. He lived at Ozena his entire life. And so at a point when he's 19, he gets the steamship, because that's the way you travel to Baltimore, where so many relatives had migrated. And he has his photograph taken. And then the oral history is that he was given this punch bowl. Now, I'm not exactly sure why a photographer gives you a cut glass punch bowl, but there it is, and that's the oral history. And so that's the photograph was taken when he was 19, and that's the punch bowl, and I own the punch bowl, and so can tell that story. So back to the person who went to Canada. As I said, he had 13 children in Canada, so I got a lot of cousins in Canada. And so his children were as illustrious as he was. And so the one on the left there, and that's a little piece from a Black History Month piece from a few years ago, and that's Bill White, who, now this is William Andrew White III. The first one was the one born in King and Queen County in 1826. The second one is the one who's born in the 1870s, who goes to Canada, and this is the third one. And so he was a composer. He was a social justice activist, the first black person to run for public office, national public office in Canada. And to the right is his sister, Portia White. And that is a Canadian postage stamp. And of course, we've done all kinds of things. We have made magnets with the postage stamp. We've made tree ornaments. We've done all kinds of things. But I do have a first issue of that stamp. And so Portia was William Andrew White III's sister, the daughter of the person who went to Canada. And her statue in Canada was very similar to that of Marian Anderson's in this country, a famous contralto. We have pictures of Portia with the Queen of England, and just very similar to Marian Anderson, and very similar in that, you know, some would have you believe that there was no racism in Canada. Well, Portia faced many of the same things that Marian Anderson did in this country and found much greater acceptance in Europe in some instances. So this is, again, like I said, my family keeps everything. And I was talking about this topic to some folks, and I did a talk in Gloucester on Friday. And the one person said to me, she said, "I'm hoping you're going to tell me what I can get rid of in my house." And then when I finished, she said, "You haven't helped me one bit." But I did, because I said this to her. For my family reunion, what we do is we bring collectibles to the reunion, and we have an auction. And so then we are raising money for the family treasury, but then also we get to share those precious collectibles, and they get to move around the family, and that's a way to clean your house out and to not throw something away, to get it to somebody's house who would appreciate it. So there is a technique there. But this is Portia, as she performed around the world, performed at Town Hall in New York City. And we had originally thought that this was her Town Hall debut, but we found out that this was not. This was December 1945. Portia did her debut at Town Hall in 1944. And one of the stateside cousins was there and held on to this program over all those years. And so at a family reunion about maybe 20, 25 years ago, we made wonderful, perfect copies, and they were sold to benefit the White Family Treasury. So that's how I happen to have a copy of her. And of course, it's the standard, concert artist. She did all the Wagner and all the European composers, and then ended with the Negro spirituals. So, still to talk about Portia. So Portia, unfortunately, died young. She died of cancer in 1968, and she was 40-something. So her brother Bill, that you've just seen his photograph, and he was multi-talented. So there were all these wonderful, just gorgeous ball gowns that Portia had performed in, of all kinds of fabrics. So Bill did needlework, and so he decided that he would make pillows with his needlework on one side and pieces from Portia's gowns on the other. And so that's what you see is Bill's needlework. So why do I own those? Because Bill's daughter sold them at the family auction, and so I paid dearly for them. But I appreciate them. Everybody's happy. Sheila, who lives in Toronto, has them out of her house because she's got a lot of stuff in her house. I'm happy, and the treasury is happy. So this is another piece from Portia that was sold by Sheila at reunion, a silver-plated bowl, and so I own that as well. And I think I probably need to have a sale soon. So just as we talk about how these treasures help us to tell community stories and broader stories, so this is the high school diploma of my aunt-in-law, Florentine Maud Jordan White, and it is from Virginia State High School in 1931. So the story is that, and some of you know this, others may be hearing it for the first time, that around the turn of the 20th century, there were no high schools, no public high schools for black folks in rural Virginia. To the extent there were public high schools, they were in the cities, Norfolk, Alexandria, Richmond, and so on. And so what did black folk do? They put their own institutions in place. And many of you are familiar with the Rappahannock Industrial Academy, again put in place by the Southside Rappahannock Baptist Association, which represented and still does primarily Essex, Middlesex, and King and Queen, although at that time there were Northern Gloucester churches in SRBA as well as some Lancaster churches. But anyway, so they put together the RI Academy, which lasted from 1902 to 1948. The only problem was when they started out, the school was not accredited. So what that meant is you finished the RI Academy, and then what? You could not go to college. And so, because this was so commonplace around the state, then there was a high school on the campus of Virginia State. At that point, it was Virginia State College for Negroes. That's how folk finished college. And so basically, this is Florentine's second high school diploma, because she's graduated from the RI Academy. It's not accredited. She's trying to go to college so she can be a teacher. And so she does this year at the Virginia State High School on campus. My mother often told the story that, interestingly enough, all these things saved, I do not have my mother's diploma like this. I don't have either of her diplomas. But she told the story. So my mother graduated from our academy in 1928, was unaccredited, not accredited until 1934. So when she went to, she was at Virginia State for 5 years, 1 year of another year, the add-on year of high school, and 4 years of college. She had to take lab courses, 3 of them, biology, chemistry, and physics, all in that 1 year, because our academy at the time she finished did not have labs. And so that, as we look at these family pieces, then we get to tell the story of the whole community. So this is my father's second high school diploma. So he too graduated from the RI Academy, but then what? You still haven't officially finished high school. So he and his brother, his older brother, were fortunate enough to be able to attend Thine Institute, which was a private boarding school for black folks in Chase City. And so this is his, and it was accredited, fully accredited, even in the early 30s. And so this is his Thine Institute diploma from 1932. And this is something I need to take to a conservator. It's in the same frame it's been in probably since the beginning. And so I need to make sure that it is cared for while I am the custodian of this document. So then we go on to my mother, and I'll try to move this quickly here. I have many things I could share. I'm going to move through them. So this is her photograph when she graduated from Virginia State College for Negroes in 1933, after the 5 years there that we've just mentioned. And one of the things that my family did not save was the graduation materials. But I found this invitation in my parents' home. It was in an envelope, and for those of you who are local, when I say Professor Robinson, you know that that is the man who was the principal of the Rappahannock Industrial Academy for many years. His daughter, Evelyn Edwardine Robinson, taught in this county for many years. And so I can only assume that what I found was an envelope addressed to Professor Robinson that had this invitation in it. So I can only assume that Edwardine must have given that to my mother later on, and that my mother did not have it. So that's the actual invitation from 1933. And then it gets better. This is the actual program from the commencement program from that year. And so we're able to put all of this together and tell that story. So this is my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. And when I asked that family members share these photographs of collectibles, I have known for all my life, I was told that that's Lilburn Triggs' bell. He was a teacher, it was one of his occupations, and he was also a Baptist preacher. But it is said that that's the bell he used to signal when it was time for school to start. And this is a one-room school, Paces School, and also Bunker Hill School at King and Queen Courthouse. And that's the bell he used to let folks know when recess was ended and so on. So when we shared documents or shared items, my cousin came, one of my first cousins, and said, "This is Lilburn Triggs' bell." I said, okay. So I have Lilburn Triggs' bell. And so we have concluded, and we may not ever know, that he probably had more than one because he taught for a number of years. And so Lilburn Triggs' bells, plural. But that's his photograph. And I so much resembled him. Everybody tells me that, but I know the long face. And he died long before I was born. So this is a piece that helps us tell his story, not so much a collectible. Well, came from Ancestry. This is his World War I draft registration card. And the really neat part about it is some of my young cousins had never seen his handwriting, so they're just delighted to see his signature. Let's see if I can point to it. But anyway, the signature is, this pointer's not working, but the signature is there at the bottom left. And what was remarkable about this, as I try to tell his story, is that he's from King and Queen Courthouse. He filled this draft registration card out in South Jersey, where he was working as a farmhand, and it says he was widowed. Of course, we know that. My grandmother died when my father was 3 years old. So, but apparently, between, after, there wasn't high school, I guess, because we know there were no high schools. So at some point, he's widowed, and he's working as a farmhand to make ends meet before coming back to Virginia and going to Virginia Union and graduating from Virginia Union. So seeing this draft registration just helps us to tell his story. Widowed, 2 boys. His parents are caring for the boys in King and Queen, and he's in South Jersey working probably on a truck farm for the summer. But that helped us to tell his story. And this is really, really precious. I have a notebook of his sermons. And this is just one page of Lilburn White's sermons. And I've read, it's very hard to read because it's written in pencil, both sides, it's written on both sides of the page. And so what I need to do, it's on my bucket list to do, is to scan all of these and then to transcribe them. So that's a lot of work. But I am so fortunate to have his sermons when he died in 1935. And he was the pastor of Trinity Baptist Church in Essex County when he died, having previously been the pastor of Jerusalem Baptist Church, a church in King and Queen that went out of business. So another direction, as I try to tell my family stories, this is J. Harold Montag, my first cousin once removed, my father's first cousin. And he was a conductor, composer, professor of music. And people always ask about the name, and my answer is that Uncle James left Stevensville in King and Queen as Montague, and when he got to Hartford, Connecticut, he was Montag. And so this is J. Harold Montag, who then created the music department at South Carolina State, and then came to Virginia, created the music department, created the a cappella choir at Virginia State. And as I said, people will give you things. I was so fortunate to be talking to Janella Lucas Edmonds, who at the time was director of the choir at Virginia State, a professor of music there. And she said, I've got some of Montag's sheet music. And of course, everybody knows him because there's a building on campus, Montag Lindsay Hall. And she said, I'll give you a piece of his sheet music. And so she's given me this Let Us Break Bread Together, published during Montag's lifetime. And I actually have it, and I own it. And so and she gave me, actually, I think there's maybe Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho is the other piece I have the arrangement for. And of course, Montag died in 1950. And this I found on the internet, here again, to tell the Harold Montag story. This is the group at Virginia State, the a cappella choir was called the Harry T. Burley Singers. And this is a picture of Montag with the singers he was directing. And of course, at our Montague, what we call it Montague family reunion, we have my second cousin, Marcellus Dungy, who many of you know. His grandmother and my grandmother were sisters, and he directs the J. Harold Montag chorus. Right, so my father, yes.
Did your mom name your sister Bernadette? Middle name is Montag?
Yes.
Did she name her after
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, she's asking whether my mother named my sister, and Nancy was her classmate, whether she named her Montague or Montag. Oh, yes, for that reason. And I have to just, a little piece about my mother is she was a griot in every sense of the West African sense. I did not know that. She'd tell me something 40 times, and I would kind of tune out after about the 20th time. But when somebody has told you something that many times, you will know it. And actually, I did a talk for Genworth Financial for Black History Month, and my cousin introduced me, and she said to that group that talking about me, she said she was destined to do family history when her mother named her. And I thought, okay, who is she talking about? But basically, my name is Bess and then Ida. So the Bess is Bessie Montague, my father's mother. The Ida is Ida Smith Cauthorne, my mother's mother. And so my mother knew in 1947 that she needed to make that happen. And she was memorializing the mother-in-law that she didn't know because my father didn't even know his own mother because, of course that's what she did. So this is my father, and we did not know that he was an artist. We had no clue. He would never have described himself as an artist, but you'll see that he was. So this is a chair that he made in grade school at Bunker Hill School, a one-room school in King and Queen Courthouse. And he held on to that chair. In fact, we've got that chair. We keep it secreted because it's rickety. We don't even want the cat to get on it. And so that is Randolph's chair that he made in King and Queen County. And I guess I need to take it and see if it should be worked on or secured in any way. But anyway, so these are some of his creations. And so to the left, you see a sculpture. That's a dog made of found wood. You see a snake, and you see a lamp that he made. Now, one of the points I want to make is talk about what you have. Tell your family, especially your young people, what you have. So when we started to talk about this a few years ago, my daughter, who is very, very into family history, I mean, she really is. I don't have to worry that what I am doing will be lost because she's so into family history. She said that she did not know that her grandfather made that lamp. She's been seeing the lamp all of her 47 years. She did not know that he made the lamp that's to the right. And so that told me you have work to do. You really have to tell the stories, write them down, and I say that to all of you, and make sure that you're young people, because had my eyes closed without her finding that out, then that piece would be lost. She would not know that Randolph White made that lamp. And of course, we have a young cousin who said that he knew, she said she didn't know that that was a dog. Of course, it's free form, kind of looks like a dog. The young cousin said that he used to try to pluck the eyes out because my father had put little jewels in that are the eyes. So he knew it was a dog, but she didn't know it was a dog. And so those are some of his creations. And then he was just always creating something. My daughter needed a piece of sculpture. She was doing something in grade school, I think 6th grade, and she said, this is what I need. So he makes her this reindeer, and I think it was actually Christmas celebrations in Scandinavia or something like that. And so he made her an exact replica, and this was actually the prop that she used when she went up to speak at my father's funeral. She carried this prop with her that he had made for her when she was in the 6th grade. And this piece, again, another Randolph creation. My father was ever the entrepreneur, and so when he was in Guam and in the South Pacific during World War II, he was cutting hair to make extra money, sending money home to my mother, doing different things. And he made all kinds of things, most of which he sold. I mean, he didn't see them as art. He was, just trying to make a coin. But somehow this one bracelet he did manage to bring home with him. And my daughter owns it. But what I did not know until we started to be intentional about family treasures, my husband said that your father said that that medal was from a downed Japanese fighter plane. Now, who knew? Because I didn't talk to my father about military. I wasn't interested in military, but my husband did. So thank goodness that somebody in the family had a clue of the provenance of this bracelet. And so it's one of my daughter's most prized possessions, but he was ever the artist. Now this, try to be quick about this. So my father, one of his businesses was that of being a funeral director that some of you local may know. And during that great migration, of course, everything is all tied in, black folk moved from the rural South to the urban North. But what did they do? They wanted to come back home to get buried, right? And they arranged for that. So my earliest memories involve late night trips to Fredericksburg, to the train station, to Richmond, to Broad Street Station, and then later on to the airport, picking up those bodies being shipped. So what were they shipped in? And I know there's one person here who can put your hand, who knows what they were shipped in, but they were shipped in heavy wooden cases, shipping cases. And so Randolph White, being the person that he was not going to throw away that wood. So, and of course, the casket was shipped in that. Then when it got here, it was buried in a vault. But there was this wood. And so did you use it for firewood, or what did you do with it? Well, I have many, many objects, tables and different things that were made from the wood of shipping crates. So I'm always putting on one event or another. So I was doing an event at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts probably about 30 years ago, in which I was recreating a Harlem nightclub. And so, I've got to be precise about this. I mean, everything, I'm actually watching Harlem Nights and stopping the screen so I can see exactly what this nightclub looks like, or at least how they recreate it. And I do a lot of research. So one of the things I wanted to have was cigarette girls, okay, who are carrying a tray, and they've got a strap around their neck. Of course, we use candy cigarettes or something. So my father took wood from the shipping crate and made a cigarette girl tray. And unfortunately, we don't have pictures of those trays. But then, he's going to recycle and repurpose. And so the next thing that happened is my husband is ever the cook. So he is always cracking nuts like pecans. And he spends hours at it. So the little device that you see there in the center is this, some name for it. Anyway, it's a nutcracker. But the thing about that, it cracks nuts beautifully, but it'll dance around. So you need to secure it. You need to attach it to something. So Randolph had the idea that he would take the old cigarette girl tray and attach the nutcracker in the center of it. And not only do you have this, you have your nutcracker so it doesn't dance around, you have a contained space so that the shells are not flying all over the place. And so we have a couple of these, but Randolph shall ever live. And of course, he was almost 100 when he left this earth, but he left so much behind. So, yes.
Getting back to that name, Montag and Montague, I remember when they had the graduation, and this one of the teachers was calling out the names of the graduates, and she said, Bernadette Montag White. I said, somebody needs to talk to her, because she pronounced that word wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if you were able to hear Miss Scarcella, but what she says that at Middlesex High School graduation, when they called my sister's name, the person said Bernadette Montag White, and you just knew that was wrong because it was Montague. Well, it's both. Yeah, thank you for that. And that would have been 1973. Right. And I bet you had a child that year graduating, did you? You were graduating, of course. Yeah, very definitely. So when folks know that you are collecting things and that you will be a custodian, they call you. So I got a call from a cousin at Mascot and King and Queen, and she said, I cannot can no longer do the steps. She was living in the family home, and she said, I need to downsize. I'm going to move into an apartment. Please come. And so I went to her, and I was with her for 6 or 7 hours. But among the things I found that she's moving out of, her parents married in 1918, and she is moving out of that home. And so there was some of everything in there. But this I found is my parents' wedding announcement. And there it is, Cousin Lillian, the mother of the person who's moving out, kept it all those years. And there it was, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Jones at Elsom, Virginia, which is one of the post offices that's no longer. And I was just so excited, I didn't know what to do, so I quietly took a picture of it, texted to my daughter, and I said to my cousin Vivian, I said, the phone's going to ring in about 5 minutes. And my daughter called screaming. She is just so delighted that we actually have my grandmother's handwriting on the envelope. The wedding was a Sunday, October 12, 1942, and I only assume that she had the announcement because it's wartime, right? And you'll see the bride's wearing a navy blue suit, so it's that kind of atmosphere during World War II. But she must have had the invitations ready to mail because she mailed them promptly. Ozina mailed that very next day after the wedding. But that is the actual invitation. I mean, very formal. It appears to be actual engraving and so on. So this is pictures of the wedding. And you see the bride in the navy blue suit. You can't tell it's navy blue. And with to the right, the bride and groom, of course, my mother's parents to the left. And then the person seated is my mother's grandfather, the one who was the postmaster. And he died in 1948, but there he is seated. So this is really strange, and I put this in here because I was going to be talking to folk in Middlesex County. And I knew that Middlesex County might understand. So this, I found an envelope that had this piece of paper in it. It says, wedding greetings. Well, it doesn't say greet. It says, from the young ladies in Mr. Walker's mathematics class. So the year is 1942. And this is John Henry Sinclair Walker's math class at Sinclair Walker High School. And basically, there's a poem there that's to my mother, and I won't take the time to read all those pieces of it, but just says at the end, we hope you many, many happy years on your journey through life. And so at the time, she was the Jeans supervisor in Middlesex and Matthews counties, and that was a program funded by a wealthy Northern philanthropist to assist teachers in Negro schools. So she worked with, not as a classroom teacher at that time, but with Middlesex Public Schools. So for whatever reason, the poem is at the top. It's on a sheet, 8.5 by 11 sheet. And all of the girls in Mr. Walker's class, it says the young ladies, that's their names at the bottom. And so, like, there's Miss Cordova Holmes from Christ Church, Virginia. And every one of them, the 18 names, says Miss So-and-so and where she lived in the county, whether it's Hartfield or Jamaica or whatever. But then, I don't know why they did this, but there are these little pieces of paper, and I put them all on one to scan, but actually 11 little pieces of paper, and those are from the boys in the class. And the boys would say, hope you many happy years, happy journey through life, happy voyage. One is Carl Tyler Conway of Locust Hill. And so that I just thought was a really different way. And they bothered to type this up. Now, this is a typewriter made in the year 1. And they typed this up, and all those little pieces of paper were in an envelope that I found. So, and now for my parents' wedding, and this would take too long, but I actually have my mother's list of all of the gifts she received, and then I have all the cards. And it's amazing, back then there were not cards that looked like black people. These were cards that were white people with blonde hair on them, but those were the cards of 1942. And so, but I was just amazed by Mr. Walker's class, his math class, managing to, taking the time to to send her good wishes upon her wedding. All right, moving very quickly. My mother, as educated as she was, as I said, she was the griot, but she did not lose the old ways. And so there were home remedies that she talked about all the time. And one was a mustard plaster. So if you had congestion in your chest, then one of the things done to break up that congestion was a mustard plaster was made. He knows what I'm talking about. And so a mustard plaster has the active ingredients. There's powdered mustard and egg white and so on. And she's now that, you can't read it, but that's written in her hand, the recipe for mustard plaster, because she told us we needed to know it, so she wrote it down. And she even says, take a piece of cloth. You could tear an old sheet. I mean, she's very explicit about what to use. And so you put this concoction on your chest, and you protect your chest with something like Vaseline, but you'd better not fall asleep, because that chemical reaction will burn you. In fact, the last time I talked about this, someone was in the audience and said, I know that. I've been burned by a mustard plaster when I fell asleep with it on. But anyway, we typed it up because as we were creating several family cookbooks, one of the things that we wanted to do was to do a home remedy section to the family cookbook. And that never actually took place, but that is the recipe in her own hand. So, near the end here, almost getting there, people give you things. So my aunt, I was my father's half-sister, Mary Ellen Eloise White Dungy. I was one of the persons who was her caretaker, not so much caregiver, but caretaker. And we, did things for her. When she was 79 years old, we had a surprise birthday party at her home. By the time she was 80, we had a surprise birthday party in the nursing home. And then at 81, she'd really slowed down, so I went to see her on her birthday in the nursing home. And what does she do for her birthday? She gives me this ring. Now, it's her birthday, but she's the one who's gifting. And it's just an amazing ring. It's, as you can see, all of these are separate little gold rings. And then there's a pave diamond disc. And so certainly one of my prized possessions that she gave me for her birthday. And so I will be, at a point, passing it on to my daughter. So another piece that I have, and this is my father's family. My father's one of 9 children who grew to adulthood. And so you see all 9 of them and their spouses and my step-grandmother and her husband. And this is when, photographs had the date on the edge, which was helpful. It was August of 1970. And you see the purse that my mother's holding off to the left. I have that purse. In fact, it's patent leather. I've had with a horn handle, and I've had it, whatever conservators do in terms of working on it to make sure that the leather stays pliable. And I do use it on occasion. So when I ask my cousins to share things with me to tell those stories, so two of my uncles were barbers in the town of West Point. And so what you see is Paul Lawrence Dunbar White, about black folks in these names, who was born in 1921 and died in 2001. And there he is to the left in the barber shop. And so as we tell that story, my cousin, this is my first cousin, sent the picture. And then she sent his final barber license. And he died in 2001, so that's his license as a barber from the Commonwealth, the last one that was issued to him. And then, now this is amazing, these are his tools. So she took this picture and sent it to me about 3 years ago. And so he's been dead for 20 plus years, so I don't know about this, these preparations over here to the right. They're probably fairly putrid by now, but at any rate, she has those. But as we try to tell Paul White's story, then that's a part of that. And then ephemera. This, and you can see that this was not well cared for. We don't know where it was, but this is my husband there as King Creon in Medea, Virginia State University Theater Troupe, about 1966. We don't even know when it was, but there he is. And of course, that performance was at Virginia Hall. And somewhere we have got a photograph of him in Waiting for Godot with the same theater trip. So he was, or the same theater troupe. So he was ever the actor. And so we have to find that. And I'm starting to be intentional when I find things. I put them where I will know where they are, and the things that I haven't found recently, then I don't know where they are yet. So this is really odd. This is a charm that is carved from a peach pit. Now, who does that? Who carves a peach pit? My family carves peach pits. I'm not exactly sure why. So this peach pit, this charm, was made by one of my young cousins, my first cousin once removed, Andrew Jackson White III, who learned how to carve the peach pit from his grandfather, my uncle, who's 92 years old, who learned it at 3 or 4 years old from his grandfather, George Granville White, whose bed and chair you saw. And so this is a tradition. I don't know why we have it, but we have this. And I don't own one of these peach pits. I don't know how to carve it, so I've got to, first I want a family member to make me one, then I want the lesson and to learn how to carve it myself. So sometimes family treasures are just not quite what you thought they were. So it was said in our family that this is Fraser White's debate key. And Fraser graduated from Lincoln University came out of King and Queen, as they all did, graduated from Lincoln University, the Pennsylvania Lincoln, about 1915 or so, and then went to Harvard Law School, was on the debate team, both in college and in law school, and then he got drafted and actually died within 3 months of being drafted in the summer of 1918. He died that October in the influenza epidemic. But at any rate, everybody said this is Fraser's debate key. So when I asked for the key, and actually my aunt had it, then my uncle has it, I said, I want to get a photograph of it. So they send it to me, and I see that the debate key says Yale. Okay? Fraser didn't go to Yale. He went to Harvard. So why does my family have this? I have no idea. It probably has something to do with Alfred Fraser White, because he was the only one in our family anywhere near an Ivy League school at that point. So it is a mystery. We're trying to figure out, why do we have this? And people just mindlessly said it was Fraser's. Well, that, the math ain't mathing on that. That does not fit. So, what is going on here? This is another piece that was said to have belonged to the grandmother in Richmond. Now, this is on my mother's side, and this piece was willed to my daughter from a cousin who died, and we never knew to ask who the grandmother in Richmond was, whose mother even. And so the best we can tell, it would have to have been the mother of someone who was born in 1837, or his wife, who was born about 1850. So we think it's the latter, but we do not know. So one of the things we did was look to see, again, whether this fits. In other words, is this something made in 1940? And so it definitely could not. But then we found it's Limoges, China. It says Haviland, the back mark. We looked it all up, and yes, the China, this pattern and all could have been. I mean, it was made that early, and so I don't know if we'll ever figure out the identity of the grandmother in Richmond to whom this belonged, but we do own it. Now, I'm really about the end. sometimes family treasures are old, 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 old. I had the privilege of being involved with the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia that was mounting an exhibition last year on the Fortin family, and they were looking at black founders. This table, owned by James Fortin, has been in the Fortin family for 7 generations, and it's in that exhibition. Of course, the Fortins were in Philadelphia during the American Revolution. This is a needlework sampler, approximately 1817 from the Fortin family, and it's in the exhibition. And then finally, this is the Fortin family Bible that at the beginning of that exhibition, opened about a year ago, was owned by Atwood Kip Fortin Jacobs. And he's had it through all these generations, and he has gifted it to the museum. And so that now is a holding of the Museum of the American Revolution. But that is about the ultimate in terms of family treasures, in terms of length. But then, folks say, well, I don't have old things. I'm adopted, or for whatever reason, I don't have. Well, create your own and start that tradition. So this is a family quilt that I made in 2003. And so it's, 21 years old. And so we'll try to hold on to it and pass it on. You see an inset of the center of the quilt. And then the piece on the right is needlepoint, created by a cousin to be sold at the family auction. And so I was able to purchase it, and you see that symbol, Fihankra, which is an Adinkra symbol from the Akan people of Ghana, meaning completeness and solidarity and family unity and so on. And so we have used that as our part of our family logo. And this is another, we had a cousin create that design. This is on my Montag family. And this is just a pillow that I created. I think it says 2004. And so becoming a family heirloom, we hope. And now, the Middlesex Museum is working on an exhibition on black businesses. So you can help with this. You can make suggestions, and you may have items in your possession if your family had a business, but then maybe your family did business with someone who had a business. And one of our committee members, Miss Hallie right here, she's calling her name, she has located a receipt from the 1920s from a funeral home in Middlesex County, J. Spencer Taylor Funeral Home. Now, it's not coming from the Taylor family. It's coming from the family who did business with the Taylor family. And so just to give you an example of the kinds of things we'll be looking for the exhibition, this is Samuel Churchill, who was a contractor, and his business was in Norfolk. But just to show you the interaction between black institutions. So this is a 1904 invoice that Samuel Churchill, contractor, has been actually hired by his brother-in-law, Professor William Edward Robinson, to work on one of the buildings at the Rappahannock Industrial Academy. And so Samuel Churchill's wife was Lucinda Robinson Churchill, Professor's sister. And so Professor Robinson actually had Mr. Churchill come from Norfolk. He was supporting that black business, and of course, family business too, and that is the invoice. And then this is an IOU back from the RI Academy to Samuel Churchill in 1908. So they're still doing business. Now, this is an example of what will be in the exhibition. And I want Tyler Radabaugh, hold up your hand. Tyler is amazing. If you haven't met Tyler, you have to meet Tyler. But Tyler found this. I think he purchased it on eBay. And this is a matchbook from, and I called him Reverend Ben Thornton because he was Reverend when I knew him. But this is Benjamin Franklin Thornton. We know about black folks in these names, who was a native of Urbana and who was a merchant. And when he gets married in 1937, his occupation is that of merchant. In the 1940 census, he's a merchant. And later in 1940, when he fills out his World War II draft registration form, he is a merchant. And so you can see here, and I've turned it so you can see it both ways, but this is a matchbook. So on one side it says Esso products. Now, who is old enough to remember Esso? Okay, for those of you who don't know, that's the predecessor to Exxon. So Esso was what we all remember. So this says Esso products, rest and refresh at Roadside in Urbana, Virginia, B.F. Thornton, proprietor. So when you turn it the other way, it says dine, dance, sandwiches, beer, and general merchandise. And so we see this African-American business that was apparently thriving. And we don't know how long. Of course, when I remember, this person was my next-door neighbor, except that he had moved to Washington. But I remember him as the Reverend Ben Thornton. But when I looked to see, trying to tell his story, so he's a merchant in 1937. He's a merchant in 1940. In 1950, he is a student. No, that's not true. He's a student at some point in between, and so apparently he's probably going to college because at some point earlier in the census records he had only gone through 2 years of high school. But then when I find him in the 1950 census in Washington, D.C., he's actually teaching vocational education, so he's gone to school in the meantime. But that's Reverend Ben Thornton as I knew him, and then of course he has in the African-American history of African-Americans in Middlesex County, you'll find that the Reverend Ben Thornton held a patent on a telephone answering machine. So as we tell all those wonderful stories, and that's their cousins, yes, the Thornton sisters, their cousin, yes.
Where was the roadside in? At the foot of the hill?
At the foot of the Red Hill.
Down from where actually the Savage family was down in there, and she lived next to her neighbor, and that part of Urbana, basically the Thorntons, that's where we were.
Right, that's where it was. And of course, we'll have to talk to the Thornton sisters about this, but the building that I remember was not large enough to have been an inn, so we have to talk about whether there was a separate building. So just moving, I'm just about done here, but as we talk about black businesses, this is a receipt from, or an invoice, I guess I should say, from India Jarvis Banks Florist right here in Saluda. And you have two black businesses represented because this is charged to Tidewater Funeral Home, which was then my father's funeral home, which is how I happen to have it. But so you get the two black businesses supporting each other. And on there, for each item, there is a discount of 20%. And so perhaps that is the discount given to the funeral home because it was a funeral home and they did business all the time. I'm not quite sure. But this is the kind of thing we're looking for the Black Business Exhibition. And some of the most, we didn't want to give it all away here. So we have some really, really exciting things for this business exhibition. And actually, the month of August is National Black Business Month. And so there may be a soft opening of the exhibition before then, but it will, that will be its hard opening. And then the final slide I want to show you. This is White Cleaners in Urbana, about 1950. The person on the tricycle is me with my father. And I can only say about 1950 because I had some really, really large, high-top white shoes. And so I was probably 2.5, doesn't look like quite 3.5. But those are the kinds of things. And this is the building, for those of you who are local, that is the Mexican restaurant now. And the history of that building is that my father, after he came from World War II, he made the cinder blocks up at my grandparents' home in Essex at Ozena, and then transported those cinder blocks to Urbana and built that building. So those cinder blocks you see there, he is intimately associated with each of the blocks. And so those are the kinds of things. We want your photographs for the exhibition. We want your, just anything that you have. We would like to share it as we do this exhibition. And many three-dimensional objects. We don't want just documents. We want documents. We don't want just documents, not just photographs, but we'd love to have your three-dimensional items as well. And we will return them. If they're photographs, we'll scan them and give you your originals right back. So just at the end here, but I hope that each of you will start to be intentional about those family treasures and remember them, document them, and document the stories that accompany them. And vow to be really intentional about protecting them. So get started. Identify them, locate them, write down everything you know about them, even if you are not sure. Just, well, this is what I was told. Write that down. And share that with family members, especially the young ones. And know that the items that you create will be the heirlooms of the future. And I often say, when I think about whether I should throw something away, I think about what is it that I would like to have had, that I would like to have now, that my family was using 100 years ago. And so that gives me some clue that if I'd like to have my great-great-grandmother's thus and so, then perhaps 3 generations down the road, they would like to have my thus and so, whatever it is. And of course, care for those items. And it's been beyond the scope of what I have talked about in terms of care. There's a handout that explains a lot of this, and there's a lot of sources out there. But just remember that the worst enemies of anything that you own are moisture. Water is not your friend. So it's moisture, it's pests like moths and mice, that kind of thing, and it's sunlight. The idea of don't hang your photographs in your home, the originals up here with the sunlight to diminish them. And so make sure those are copies. But that's not my specialty in terms of care, but it's something that you all want to be aware of. And on the handout, there are any number of examples of guides to caring for things. So thank you for listening. And I would welcome your comments or questions.
Do you still have the tricycle?
I don't have my tricycle. Isn't that awful? I do not have my tricycle. Yes, that's terrible. You're asking about the business? Okay. Yeah, the business exhibition, the theme is African American businesses in Middlesex County. And I'll tell you the origin of this. In February of 2020, our Genealogy Society did, and we were in person at the time, we had a lecturer come in and talk about Green Book businesses in the Middle Peninsula. And so the Negro Traveler's Green Book was, of course, that book that told you where you could get a meal, or if you were traveling through the South, or where you could sleep for the night, because of course, there were only certain places. And a very few business, relatively speaking, advertised in the Green Book. There are actually 3 in Middlesex County: Oliver's Restaurant up the county, Mr. LeVar's service station, Midway service station at Cook's Corner, and Len Davis's at Cook's Corner. So those 3 businesses. There were probably more businesses, I don't think any in King and Queen that advertised, but in Essex there were probably 6 or 7, including Markhaven Beach and McGuire's Inn and Harris's Grill and so on. But we got so many calls from folks saying, well, you didn't mention Mr. Oscar Gaines' service station. You didn't mention, so we thought, okay, there is an interest in remembering those achievements of those businesses. And so that is how the idea was born to, and we thought the museum, because our genealogy society doesn't have a place, doesn't have a space, and so the museum decided to look at this African American businesses, and so it will be African American businesses in Middlesex County. And I'm probably not remembering the time frame, but it is up through the beginning of the 21st century at least. Yes.
Any idea on how many African American businesses are in the county these days?
Well, you know, that's interesting. We, who would know? Some years ago, the museum was doing a piece on African Americans in the Middle Peninsula who made their living in the culinary world. And at that time, we tried to find out local folk who were doing culinary kinds of things, and we found a few. And that's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, but that's, you know, I don't know how one would get an answer to that question. But actually, I was hearing some folk talk about businesses in Essex County, and St. John Baptist Church near Tappahannock did a piece last Sunday, I think, on black businesses, and they were shocked at how many people came forward to say they had businesses in Essex County.
I would just like to say, if you have things and don't know what they are, how old they are, what, do you ever watch the Antique Roadshow? I love that. And they're always showing things that people just say, well, I just thought it was a piece of trash, or I was going to throw it away. Things like pictures and vases and things like that. I mean, those things are considered antique. All depending on, you know, the glass that they're made out of and everything like that. So that'd be a good idea to find out what's old and what's not.
That's exactly right. Be careful before you throw anything away. In fact, photographs, don't throw photographs away, even if you don't know who they are. You know, many times museums are interested, archives are interested. Our friend Tyler found the papers of Mary Ann Harris of Urbana and her husband, Henry Harris, in the special collection at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And so that, you know, they were interested in those Virginia papers even. And so you never know who might be interested. And so definitely hold on to those things. Of course, we've all seen this story recently of a woman in the Richmond metro area who buys, what was it, a vase, and it ended up just being worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Of course, we know that that doesn't happen so often.
And another thing, I don't mean to do a whole lot of talking, but I look at this show called American Pickers. I don't know how many look at that. There people go around to different old barns and old things, and you'll be surprised what they find and what they will pay for it. Anything like old clothes, business signs, and things like that. Don't care how rusted they are, what shape. They pay a lot of money for those things. For some reason.
Sure.
I think you know, he likes to restore them, you know.
Do you know anybody that left that on the Mark Haven Beach in Essex County?
Do I know anybody that, what about Mark Haven?
Mark Haven Beach, do you know anybody still alive that, you know, from that family?
No, you know, Reginald Markham died, Gertrude Markham died, and their son Peter died maybe even before one of the parents. And so, and Reginald Markham was from the Caribbean, perhaps. His wife, I believe, was from Essex County, but I don't know anything about her family. I don't think there's much. Thomas Sonny Harris, so many of you knew, was the executor of the Markham estate, and I don't think there was hardly anyone left. I mean, I can't say there's nobody related to Gertrude Markham, and I'm not remembering her birth name off the top of my head, but There, of course, there may be collectibles. We'll ask Tyler to find them. He's so good at that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're not, because Markhaven Beach, for those of you who may not be familiar with the area, that was a black beach in Essex County that we all went to. And of course, we could not go to white folks' beaches. And so that's the beach, and there was a dance hall and a hotel and just all kinds of wonderful things. And apparently it is privately owned, and now you can't even approach the area, but you turn on, what is it, Ash? It's at a place called Oakley's, which is one of those places that, old place name that we don't hear much anymore, but it's Ashdale Road. It's you're headed north on 17. It's a right turn where you turn to go to Macedonia Baptist Church, and that's where Markhaven Beach was.
I think there's something similar with the history of,
What's that?
there's a beach in Williamsburg, and we had a couple of, one of the few beaches, and so for West Point, we would come to Markhaven, or we would go to Log Cabin Beach, thank you.
Where was Log Cabin Beach?
Williamsburg, yeah, no.
Seaview in Norfolk, Sunset Lake Park in Portsmouth, and Bayshore in Hampton.
Sure, there were limited places that we could go and go to the beach, yes.
Do you only do research? I know you do research. This was a great presentation, but do you do researches for other families, like besides like other families? Like I'm a Garnett. I'm from King and Queen.
The answer to that is yes, but at this moment, my plate is full. Yeah, I cannot take on another piece, not at this moment, maybe next year.
What is the best way to preserve pictures? Maybe for your family, they may not have known who the grandfather was or what he looked like. So what is the best way to preserve pictures and share them? And the other question is documents, say your birth certificates or your will. I know about going to having a safe deposit box, but, or having a safe at home. But what is the best way to preserve important papers?
Okay, she's asking the best way to preserve important papers, and what I have learned is you do not answer on something that is not your area of expertise. I can tell you that her first question was about photographs, and there's so many things don't do. Don't write on them, don't glue them into an album, many things, identify things to do, identify the people. And, we think that, okay, this is a picture we took last year, and we know who's on the picture. But if we don't write it down, how is somebody going to know who's on the picture, 50 years from now? And so there are some ways. I think there are probably some things on your handout, but that is an answer that a professional in many museums and that kind of place can answer for you. I won't step into something that is not my area of expertise.
It's on like digital now, it's on the internet.
Pardon?
Digital, put them on CDs.
Yeah, put them on. That's a good way, certainly, to share them digitally right now. All those platforms of the moment, and this is something that always comes up when genealogists gather, is can you access your digital materials from 20 years ago? Probably not. It's a whole operating system that you cannot get to. And so what is the way that you maintain those electronic files so that you could access them? And I'm just throwing that, that's a question that comes up, and I don't know all the answers, but I do know that I personally, I've heard some people say, well, I've scanned all the pictures and I'm going to throw the hard copy away. I know you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. But, what is the way that you make sure that the electronic versions are accessible forever and ever? I don't know about that. You've seen a shift from one type of media to another. And so, yeah, that's a question we all, and I've heard people say, well, I have my files electronically, genealogists, and I don't need hard copy anymore. Well, I need hard copy. Um, any other questions, comments?
Besides, just out of curiosity, I have a cousin here. I have lots of cousins here.
Lots of cousins here.
But,
Yeah.
Montag Montague. On my mother's side, my grandmother was a Montague, but I've often heard my mother discussing and saying Montag Montague. And the only Montag Montagues that I could find in the King and Queen area where my great-grandmother, where my grandmother was from, says the one person, John Montague, who was my grandmother's father, can't be. So, you're kind of lost. And I don't know whether, and I know there are Montagues here that I'm sure in Middlesex and whatever that we're kin to from my father's side, the Thorntons. So I don't know whether anybody's got a special research group going where they're trying to link up these similar things that are happening within.
She's asking for Montague research. There is a Facebook group of Montagues, but they're not really serious researchers. I mean, they're just happy to find somebody with the same name. And so I'm a member of that group, but I don't really do anything with them. And I've not been able to connect my Montagues. Bob and Montague and I talk frequently as to whether we're related, whether I'm connected to his Montagues, and of course his father was the Governor Montague. I mean, his grandfather, rather. And I've found no connection. In other words, basically, King and Queen is a Bern County. And so for that reason, we are limited. You're not going to find estates and papers, estate papers that have, or wills that have enslaved Africans in the enslavers' wills, because the courthouse records were destroyed multiple times, the latest being in 1864. And so we don't get that for King and Queen, but I'm unable to take my Montagues beyond my great-grandfather and don't connect to any other black Montagues or any white Montagues. So I can't help that. In Gloucester, yeah. There's a place, yeah. Montague is in the southern part of Essex. It's Laneview was the southernmost post office in Essex, and then there's Montague. You see the sign Montague Farms as you are headed north, but that was actually Montague Post Office. No, in Essex, just over in Essex. Yeah. Any questions? Other questions? Okay.
I'm from my wife's family is from King and Queen. But you said a minute ago that King and Queen is a Bern County?
Yes. When we say a burned county, researchers talk about counties where the records burned. And so King and Queen is a burned county. King William is a burned county. Middlesex is not a burned county. And, of course, we know the story of the records having been saved by Philemon T. Woodward, who's somewhere in one of these pictures over there, who was the clerk of the circuit court during the Civil War, who saved the records. But burned counties and Family Search and some of the other folk who do genealogical research have given us all kinds of suggestions of what you can do to try to fill in the spaces when you're researching a burned county. But the records burned. Well, a lot of courthouses burned during the Civil War, but that's not the only time that records burned. In fact, I've forgotten the year now, but the King and Queen Courthouse burned during the Civil War, but it also burned before the Civil War. And then King William burned in the 1880s even, and perhaps earlier. So, there were fires all over.
The state AG asked many of the counties, asked all of the counties during the Civil War to send their records to Richmond. safekeeping and to preserve the records so that it would be safe after the Civil War. When Richmond got burned and a lot of counties lost theirs. And Woodard didn't send Middlesex, he buried them, hid them, and kept them here
Right.
until after the war, and then he went and dug them out, and that's why we have the records, and a lot of counties come here to use ours
Yeah.
to try to make connections.
We're very fortunate. In fact, for that reason, the Middlesex Museum gives a preservation award each year to someone who has done much to preserve the history of Middlesex County. And we put Philemon T. Woodward kind of at the top of that, the head of the class. And so he was given the award posthumously in 2023 for the Middlesex Preservation Award for that reason. And some of his descendants were there to accept that award. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I guess it's somebody here almost as old as I am.
Almost.
But you know, my father was an oysterman, and he used to make brooms to wash off their washboard, you know, the thing they dump the oysters on when they catch them. They made their own brooms to wash it off. And I remember him at night, he would cut a pole, I guess about that long. Either it was hickory or oak or something like that. And it wasn't very large, just about like that. And he would sit down at night and take a knife and peel the bark back. And he'd peel it back until he'd get maybe a broom made about that big and that long. And then he would put wire around it and wire it up, and that was his broom that they washed it. And I was just wish I had saved one when he was making them. Yeah, but I was asking anybody to know about it, but if anybody had one.
I was hoping that Miss Carcella had one of her father's brooms. Yeah, we'd love to have that. All right, well, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Let me ask you to mark your calendars, save the date. As we said, the Middlesex Museum will be opening this exhibition in August, but the Middlesex Museum is also partnered with Antioch Baptist Church, and we will be erecting a highway marker for Antioch, which is the oldest African-American church in Middlesex County. And that marker will, Antioch, for those of you who are not familiar, is just back here on Oaks Landing Road. It's visible from this building. And the highway marker will be just out at the corner here. And we will be doing that on Saturday, August 3rd, as a part of Antioch's homecoming, you know, the whole church homecoming piece that is a product of the Great Migration and people moving to the north and coming back. And so that will be Saturday, August 3rd. And so please mark your calendars and do plan to join the Middlesex Museum and Antioch Baptist Church for that wonderful occasion. We are so excited about it. All right, Marilyn, our president of the museum board, is there something you want to tell us before we go?
Just that, Kevin, you can verify with me, this will be available on our website, on middlesexmuseum.com, and also you'd be able to get a copy of the handout, the Saturday, if you didn't get one today, on our website. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so very much for coming. And have a good rest of your day.